tell me anything specific.
I can't help but bring in our guest for this hour, trial attorney Michael Jaafar and trial attorney David Yenna. David, first time on Court TV. Thank you for joining us. And gentlemen, this witness is a slippery one, no matter how she asks it. It's amazing to me. It started with him saying this is privileged conversations. The judge did an in-camera and said, no, I do not find that the statements are privileged. And then today, I can't recall. I was speculating. I don't know. I can't seem to recall. I mean, it's not possible for her to seemingly get an answer out of him. David, let me start with you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, he's being very evasive, and I think that's telling. He can't answer any question. Anything that he's trying to be pinned down on, he's just moving the target. And I think that's very telling in his testimony, that he's trying to avoid the questions and not answer them.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. So, Michael, we know that this is all about the defense filing a motion to say there was a relationship between the district attorney, Fani Willis, and Nathan Wade, who is the special prosecutor on the election interference case against Trump and the co-defendants. What does this line of questioning have to do with that? Are we getting too far afield or not?
This witness is the perfect example of why you don't have lawyers in the jury box. They're terrible. They're very difficult. You see how slippery he is. I think we are getting too far afield at this point, Judge Ashley, but this is a hearing that, they're basically, this is like in civil cases would be a deposition, right? A deposition would last hours and hours and hours, and all you're looking for is nuggets. So they went in and told them, do you remember the day when you got the information? Don't tell us whether or not you believe the information. When did you hear the information? He couldn't give them a date. Then they said, did you hear about it in 2019? What they're trying to do, in my opinion, is try to establish that the relationship started before he was appointed as a special prosecutor, which would, in my opinion, totally discredit the whole entire prosecution. That's not a political point. It's just as an observer of the law, and I'm technically an attorney here, Judge Ashley, but I'm actually a big kid watching this case. I'm riveted by it. I can't wait to see how this pans out. But yeah, I think we're going a little bit far afield, but I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to find the one or two nuggets that would allow them to make their basically closing argument at the end of the day that, hey, the prosecution and the special prosecutor, they were they're suspect. This case should not go forward.
And I'm riveted too. I'm like a kid as well. I'm like, I cannot stop watching. And David, I think if we talk about those two nuggets, here's my opinion, that number one, they are trying to establish that there was actually a relationship between Fani Willis and the special prosecutor before he was ever appointed as the special prosecutor. And number two, that potentially Fani Willis and Nathan Wade perjured themselves on the stand. Do either of those things, in your opinion, let's say that they're able to prove those things, does that amount to a necessity of being disqualified as the prosecutor in the case, in your opinion?
Absolutely it does, right? So impartiality, conflicts of interest, those are the cornerstones of our profession, and particularly when you have a trial of this magnitude and when what the implications are, that due process is important. And anything that intervenes in that in any way, should be taken very seriously.
All right, gentlemen, stay with us. We are going to go from high profile to A-lister. We're going to take you to New Mexico, where Hannah Gutierrez is being charged for the murder of Helena Hutchins, and Alec Baldwin will face his trial later on in the year. Stay tuned. We'll go right back into court.
Produce an accurate shot.
This cross-examination points the finger directly at Alec Baldwin. So let me bring back in trial attorneys Michael Jaafar and David Yenna. Michael, let me start with you. This testimony that the shooter had to have cocked the gun and either pulled the trigger or already depressed it, and then you don't point a gun at a person. You should have training on the cross draw, all of these things. And remember, it's involuntary manslaughter charges, which means recklessness. Do you think this is enough, Michael, to say reasonable doubt as to Hannah because it was Alec Baldwin's fault?
I've thought that from before this trial even started. I remember when the charges came down, I, like all people, thought to myself, why would they go after Alec Baldwin? It was clearly a mistake. Clearly he didn't intend to do it. Then I read a little bit more about it, and I found out that they're charging with involuntary manslaughter. Then I read further, and I found out that Alec Baldwin was the executive producer. He takes a certain sense of responsibility if I'm the owner of my law firm, if somebody comes to work for me and they sit at a desk and the desk collapses, there's some responsibility on me because I'm in charge, right? And so I thought from day one that because he's the executive producer and all of those people were his subordinates, they pretty much would have done anything he wanted to do. And then we know that in day 2 of testimony, there was testimony that 6 people quit the set. They quit the company, the set, citing safety concerns, and nobody stood up to Alec Baldwin. Now, when you take that risk and you're the owner and you're the head honcho, you know, good things come to you. You get the credit for the good things, but guess what? You get the credit for the bad things as well. So I do think that this is being squarely pointed back at him, yes.
I think it is, but Hannah Gutierrez, as an armorer, I think it can effectively be argued, was also reckless because of the things she failed to do, yet that was her job description. David, we haven't yet gotten you to weigh in on this trial. Tell us your thoughts as this is proceeding.
Yeah, this trial is all about expert. You know, Ms. Gutierrez, she's the armorer. She has certain responsibilities in that role, and she needs to ensure that there's safety on set. There's various stages to that, you know, monitoring the actual artillery coming into the set, monitoring the guns as they're handed to anyone throughout the set. And it's up to the prosecution to prove that, but for her not meeting a certain standard of care along the way, you know, Ms. Hutchins would still be alive. Now, there may be other people responsible for chaos or safety concerns on the set, but, you know, she definitely plays a role in that standard of care that should have been there in order to save a life.
Yeah, I wonder if they'll both be found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. I don't know what the jury's going to do. Clearly still listening to evidence, but when we come back, we're going to get you back into this trial for more testimony. Stay tuned.
Discussed with Mr. Jason Bowles that if Thel wanted to provide an actual statement to me, that we needed to set up an interview.
Still joining us for this hour, trial attorneys Michael Jaafar and David Yenna. All right, gentlemen, I think that she's very transparent to say there were hundreds of people, just a few of us, and in their sheriff's office, they only have one interview room, so it's very clear that they did not have the manpower to anticipate this kind of investigation. So, David, how much does that affect the credibility, reliability, believability of a thorough investigation?
Honestly, in a case like this, I don't know if it does. You're going to have, you know, testimony of certain people on set and what the conditions were. And there, at the end of the day, there's a standard set of practices that Ms. Gutierrez, you know, needs to follow. And as long as they, you know, they can show that she didn't meet those standards and that led to the death in this case, you know, the fact that there's so many parties involved doesn't so much matter. As long as they can prove those essential elements, you know, they're going to get a conviction.
Well, Michael Jaafar, I mean, when you think about it, this whole investigation had issues from the very beginning. And it's clear there were letters that went back and forth about how difficult the investigation was and how it was kind of a mess. And I think that has to be something that the defense has to pounce on, because we're talking about really at the core of this case, how these live rounds got on the set, who was responsible for it. And if you don't have a tight crime scene, I mean, the defense can clearly suggest that maybe somebody moved something, somebody had the opportunity to do X, Y, and Z, which might have changed the outcome of the investigation.
Absolutely. You know what I kept thinking about, Michael, when I was watching this case yesterday and today? This is a law school exam question. That's what this case is. The facts could go either way, right? When we're tested in law school, we're not tested on the basics. We're supposed to know that on day one. We're tested on facts that could go either way, and you could say this person's guilty and you're right. The same person could say this person's not guilty and you're right, depending on your analysis and how you analyze it. So this investigation and how loose it was, these are important things, right? These are very important things. But at the end of the day, I think this stuff inures better to the benefit of Alec Baldwin than Hannah Gutierrez, only because at the end of the day, the buck does have to stop somewhere. I've been vacillating on whether or not that's Alec Baldwin because he is the executive producer. And even when they were doing the investigation, people are going to be starstruck that they're talking to Alec Baldwin. But at the end of the day, if you're the executive producer, you appoint somebody like Hannah Gutierrez to be responsible for their job, something that important, right? So this is a law school exam question. It could go either way. But I agree with you. The investigation was done sloppily. but that inures more so, in my opinion, to Alec Baldwin than Hannah Gutierrez.
Wow.
And, you know, Michael, I just have to ask, so we know the defense is pointing the finger not just at Alec Baldwin, but also generally to production. And I think it's an effective defense strategy, and they're really cross-examining these witnesses well.
Yeah, I think the only way to go is to suggest that she couldn't do her job because of the producers, right? Because I think it's very clear that she was the one that handled the bullets and put it in the gun. But what you have to get this jury to understand is that that only happened because the producers allowed a set to exist that made it possible for that to happen. That it wasn't her fault that these live rounds got on the set, or that she could possibly have made that mistake.
And I think it's a good defense, but I also think that she and Alec Baldwin could be found to have been reckless in this circumstance.
It's interesting. That's a good question, whether one was more reckless than the other, or if one was reckless at all.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Does that matter? It's going to be interesting to see what the jury does. Coming up next, the case agent describes the investigation into PDQ props. Stay tuned. A little bit of breaking news. You can see that verdict clock in the Michelle Troconis case has stopped at 29 minutes, exactly for the reason that you and I said, which is, oh, it's going to be time for pizza or time to go home. They've gone home for the day.
Yes, they've gone home for the day, only 30 minutes in. I guess they realized, I don't know what they did. Maybe they took a vote or something and realized that, hey, we got some things to discuss tomorrow, so let's go home and come back fresh.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Possible. Maybe they decide we just need to sleep on it. We're going to have a verdict in the morning. We'll see.
Oh, you think that the verdict was, no, I doubt it. 29 minutes?
I doubt it. There's a lot of evidence.
Not in that case. Yeah. In that case, it could go either way. All right, back now to the trial. It remains underway in New Mexico for the embattled armorer Hannah Gutierrez. She's charged with involuntary manslaughter in the death of a cinematographer.
Before we get you back into court, we want to bring back in our trial attorneys, Mike Jaafar and David. I appreciate you both still being with us. And tell me this, what do you think of this testimony? You know, she's straightforward, but the reality is, Michael, they really didn't do as thorough of an investigation as they might have had they had the manpower.
I want to amend my opinion earlier when I said that I don't know if the shoddy investigation was a big deal. I'm agreeing with Michael now. Yes, I can see the holes now because the live rounds are actually going to be the entire case, right? She was the armorer. We just learned in this case, I never knew that there was such a thing as an armorer, right? Now I see the importance of an armorer. Well, there was a live round. How did it get in there? Did it pass through your custody? If it passed through your custody, it seems like you were negligent. But what if it didn't pass through your custody? What if it skipped you? So the shoddy investigation is, in my opinion, everything at this point, yes.
David, I gotta talk about this PDQ. You know, PDQ has always been at the center of this thing. They're the ones that provided the ammo to the set. And Seth Kenney was someone people were talking about maybe might be responsible. He was very cooperative from the very beginning. They didn't even get a search warrant for about a month to go in and look at his place. So much could have happened between the time this happened and when, you know, the search warrant was executed. What do you make of the PDQ search warrant being so late and Seth Kenney and his role?
Yeah, so that's what the defense has a key on. Where did these live rounds come from? And where did the actual investigation fail here? If they can show that, you know, Ms. Gutierrez did her job, she met every standard possible, but there's no explanation where these live rounds came from, and that's the intervening cause here, that she could have done nothing different to prevent this from happening because these live rounds got into that gun without her knowledge or ability to even foresee it. Then, you know, that's where the defense hangs their hat and provides reasonable doubt for a jury to acquit her.
Yeah, and I don't think they're going to be able to show that, but I think they might be able to show or might be able to argue that someone else was responsible for those getting on the set and making sure that live rounds weren't involved.
I agree.
And then she took over. That's the only way I think they get away with it.